So first up to my left, we've got Chris Orlob, Director of Sales at GOM. Chris is an accomplished SaaS revenue leader with a track record of achieving hypergrowth revenue targets, generating white-hot demand, and winning the unfair share of the market, with rich leadership experience across the full spectrum of the revenue function, from new logo sales to demand marketing to retaining and expanding current customers. He's got a passion for people leadership and development, and he was voted a top 10 voice in sales by LinkedIn in 2018. Please welcome Chris to the panel tonight. And next we've got Erin Bush in the middle, Senior Director of Revenue Ops at Lean Data. Erin started her career in sales and sales leadership and has spent the last 6 years working to build a better revenue machine through aligning marketing, sales, and customer success with systems, data, and process. Her team works to build a seamless customer experience and tools for success for each internal team. An Atlanta native, she worked at companies like Alfresco and SalesLoft and moved to the Bay a year ago to help scale Lean Data. Please welcome Erin to the panel. And lastly, Ryan Barretto, SVP of Global Sales at Sprout Social. Ryan is the SVP of Sales at Sprout Social. Sprout is a leading provider of social media engagement, listening, and analytics solutions for 20K customers across 100 countries. Ryan oversees the sales and CS organizations, which include new customer acquisition, account management, customer retention. In his 3 years with Sprout, the company has grown to 600 plus employees, tripled revenue, and secured their Series E funding. Prior to Sprout, Ryan was VP of Global Sales at Pardot, a Salesforce company where he was responsible for helping customers grow and transform their business. He helped triple revenue growth in 2 years, making Pardot one of Salesforce's fastest growing business. During his 10 years at Salesforce, he served in a variety of leadership roles, ultimately building offices and teams in Toronto and Canada, and was part of the team growing the company from $180 million in revenue to 7.5. He holds a degree from arguably hands down the best university in Canada, Wilfrid Laurier University, and a master's degree in international marketing from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Ryan sits on the board for Rework Training, a 501c3 focused on recruiting, training, and placing diverse, financially disadvantaged professionals into tech sales, and he's a Canadian native. Please welcome Ryan to the panel. So in spirit of finding panelists and working for this event, what I was hoping to do today was almost discuss the realm of possibility. What are companies capable of doing? Oftentimes in Canada and Toronto, we see what each other are doing, but we don't get really in-depth and granular exposure to what are some of the fastest growing companies down south, and hearing what the leaders there are doing to help enable them to grow. And so today I'm excited to bring, Chris, who's got a ton of exposure and experience with Gong's content strategy. If you've seen anything about their content strategy, they're all over LinkedIn. So what the hell is Chris doing? So that everyone in this room knows about Gong before you even stepped in this room, before you even met Chris or anyone at that company. Ryan, building, scaling, hiring teams, how you triple the company, how you take them from 50 employees to over 600, and what that process looks like and some of the breaking points. And then Erin, who's got a lot of background in building tech systems and revenue operations and going into the weeds and understanding how each team needs to thrive and what you need to do to enable and help your teams be as effective and efficient as possible. So I'm really excited to have you on the panel today. I'm looking forward to it. We'll start with pretty basic questions, something high level, nothing too crazy. I'd love to get your take on just how the industry has grown over the last little while, over the last decade or so, specifically obviously B2B sales more than anything. And in your careers, you've come from organizations each that actually we've seen experience that hypergrowth, from Salesforce, SalesLoft, Inside Sales, all have had their respective successes. So how have things changed, Ryan, over your career, starting from Ceridian back in the day to Salesforce now and Sprout Social with abundance of technologies? Things are much more global, access to much more information. So from your perspective, what have been the biggest factors that have changed over the last decade?
I think the biggest thing that I've seen change, and it's really sped up over the last few years, is just product-led growth companies. And you look around and see some of the companies in the headlines today: Shopify, Slack, Atlassian, Dropbox, a Gong is a great example of it. These companies are product-led. The product is the best salesperson. And you're seeing more and more of these companies that are coming out where there's a ton of virality in those products. And there's a seamless, frictionless experience for the customer. And so it's really changed the way that sales is working in this B2B environment. And we see it at Sprout every day. We are an inbound model. We generate about 9,000 trials per month. We are driving a ton of content similar to Gong and HubSpot and others before us. And as customers come through, we want them to experience the product. And if you think about the evolution of the way that customers have bought, today the stats say that you're 65% of the way through the evaluation process before someone will raise their hand to talk to a salesperson. And so for a lot of these product-led companies, the benefit there is when that customer is ready to raise their hand and talk to a salesperson, they've already experienced the product. They haven't just read about the content, they've actually been in the technology. And so that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen, and we think about that every single day in the way that we're engaging with our customer base.
Has it changed how you train reps? Has it changed how you onboard reps? What do they have to do now versus what they had to do prior to this fad or accessibility of product-led companies?
It's dramatically changed the way that we train our team. We're constantly looking at the sales process to remove friction. And so we know it's really easy to sign up for a trial. You're up and you're in the platform in 2 minutes. But now when you get engaged with a salesperson, you've got to add a ton of value. They're already leveraging the product. So if we just send out a generic email, they don't want to talk to us. We've got to show a new set of value that they can't find online. And so I think more of our salespeople as consultants, in some ways customer success professionals, if they're truly going to be able to engage with customers. So it's dramatically changed the value proposition that we need to deliver.
Do you find the same thing, Chris?
I think one of the testing, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Nice to see everybody, first of all. I think the number one change that I've noticed in the last 7 to 10 years specifically is how old the typical account executive is. So 10 years ago, you could have a sales guy or you could have a sales gal, and they tended to be a little bit older because we had a field model. And what technology like Zoom did is they created this inside model where the barrier to entry for young sales professionals went way down. And so you see account executives who are 25, 26, and 27, and that's great, but it changes the demands you need to place on coaching. It changes the demands you need to place on training, on onboarding. And as a side note, with few exceptions, quotas don't tend to get adjusted to the level that they should to reflect the new skill level. So yeah, I would say a decline in the age of the sales force has been one of them, which to some extent is a decline in the skill set, which increases the demands we need to make on coaching and training and onboarding.
And have you made that investment? Are you guys emphasizing on a lot of that? I mean, obviously the product does that, but internally, what do you think you've done specifically at Gong to help alleviate some of the issues with inexperience or lack thereof experience?
I would give all the credit to our sales enablement team. Forget the product, forget how much we spend or how much time we spend on coaching as a sales management team, and we do a lot of it. Our sales enablement team has done a world-class job of creating a really systematic onboarding process for new hires and setting them up for success. So when I started at Gong 2.5 years ago, or almost 3 years ago now, I was the second US employee. We didn't really have onboarding. My onboarding was listening to calls in Gong and trying to get up to speed from there. And we brought on just a superstar sales enablement manager who designed the entire day for 14 days in a row for new hires, exactly what they're going to do every hour. So an investment in sales enablement has been a big one for us.
Erin, I noticed on LinkedIn that you're hiring a sales enablement manager. So this is pretty exciting. What is that part of the responsibility, developing the onboarding and helping ensure that sales reps are as effective as possible, ensuring that they're properly trained and they're properly addressing some of the concerns that customers might have for sales reps? as they're coming into the product? Well, do you agree, disagree, or how are you different than Gong?
I agree with a lot of that. I mean, 10 years ago, I was a sales rep in my mid-20s, so I definitely saw the evolution as that's changed. And the way that our sales team typically works is that we have a lot of people come in as ADRs, and then they move up into being AEs, and they're learning pieces of the process along the way. And so you have to set them up not just with the tools and the target accounts to go after, but how to go through the entire process. So we've hired someone to run our enablement program, and we're continuing to grow that team and invest in it. It's a very big priority for us.
All right, we'll get back to that shortly. I want to jump into a question that I think many people in the audience are interested in, and that's around content, specifically Gong's content. Just like, yeah, what about it? What has that process been like? Can you give us some visibility into that? Because similar to your onboarding strategy, that probably didn't exist 2 years ago.
Right.
So how did it come to fruition, and what has that process been like?
I think any answer or any question you have about like marketing or content can always be answered with one technique, and it's not even a technique, it's just understanding your audience really deeply. So if you're trying to figure out what topic to write a blog post about, it comes back to understanding your audience. If there's like, if I could condense our entire approach to content strategy to 4 bullet points, it would be like, this is the secret. Understand your audience, read every day, because that gives you like a lot of ideas. Write every day, write every goddamn day. Understand your audience, read every day, write every day, write every goddamn day. So the first one is the most important. You can write, you can come up with ideas, but if you don't understand your audience's pain, their objections, like essentially their soul, then you're just kind of guessing. So I don't know if that answers, I don't even remember what the original question was. I think I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but
It was around the content strategy. Okay.
Yes.
So,
okay.
Understand your audience. So how did you understand your audience? I mean, obviously you come from a sales background, so it's easy for you to understand. But sometimes it's not easy to pull exactly what you want or what type of content you care about. So were you interviewing clients or prospects? Were you going down, sitting with them, and understanding what they do day to day?
So I had a little bit of an unfair advantage coming into Gong. First of all, I worked at InsideSales.com as a sales rep and as a sales manager. So I understood the pain firsthand. And I was also selling to VPs of sales and our target audience in that part of my career. So that's like number one. The second part, like my next part of my career journey, was being an entrepreneur, which was, in short, it was like a small competitor to Gong. And what I did for the 1.5 years that we were running that business is I interviewed about 250 VPs of sales. And I did that not because I wanted to figure out what blog posts I wanted to write to them. I did that because that's how you come up with a home run product strategy. And what that ended up translating to is just deep domain knowledge. So the actionable takeaway there is not that you have to spend 2 years interviewing hundreds of customers in your target segment. I think the takeaway is interview at least a few of them. You don't have to have spent time in their shoes to understand their pain. I think that goes a long way if you have done it, and kudos to you if you have. Start off with like 3 interviews a month for a few months, and you'll blow past your peers.
Can I add one more thing? So we consume a ton of content from Gong, and I think one of the things that they do maybe better than anybody is data-driven insights. And so through the platform, there's a ton of insights. I don't know how many calls you're all listening to, but whenever you tell me something, I believe it, because there's a lot of data behind it. But you've done a great job of packaging up what's working from a sales perspective. What are the things that are happening on a discovery call? What are you doing wrong on the demo? What are the best sales reps doing? And that data-driven insights is providing information that most of us don't have. And I think that's actually the main key for the content strategy. And I think about you all, I think about Drift. There's a few companies out there that are delivering outsized value in the content, and it's forcing people to go in and learn from it. And I think that's what we all need to be thinking about with our content strategy. How do we educate and help people and provide them with stuff that they don't have today?
Yeah, one more thing I would add to that, because I just remembered the original question you asked me, which was like, what was the strategy and how did you come up with that? I wish I could say that back in November 2016 when I started, I had like all of this figured out and like knew exactly what I was going to do for the next 3 years. But what actually ended up happening is all of this stuff iterated over time. Like your strategy is not a set it and forget it type thing. It's something that you're continually iterating on. I remember when we published our first article like this, where at that time we had analyzed only 25,000 sales calls. And it was like, here were the 5 things I learned. I thought that was the end. I was like, well, I mean, there's no other analysis that I can pull out of these calls. And it was like 60 articles later, we still have that. We're like, we have no more ideas. And like the next day, we're like, well, we haven't looked at this yet, so let's go run a test on that.
So that leads to my next question. How do you sustain it? Are these weekly meetings? Because you're no longer there, right? So obviously you were the mastermind behind all these articles, and you put in the time and effort into building them and taking the time to learn and research and listen to the content potentially. How have you sustained it now that you're no longer in that role?
I really wish I had like a good answer for you. I think part of it is fear, because I would get to these meetings not knowing what the hell I was going to be writing out about for like the next 2 weeks, and so I would like force myself to go for like a walk in the woods and like hope the heavens opened up and struck me with my next idea, which by the way is a very underrated technique for coming up with ideas. The heavens often did open up and strike me with it. Usually if you mix a little bit of wine in there, then it tends to work. But the second thing is I would just go back to understanding the audience. Like what were the almost like micro problems that they were dealing with? What did they want to know about their sales calls that data had not yet told them? Like a perfect example that we haven't written about, like somebody tagged me on LinkedIn the other day and they're like, hey Chris, do you have data that correlates when a prospect asks, how do you do that when you're demoing with success? Because their hypothesis was if a prospect is asking that, they're interested, and there's probably like a positive correlation with close rates. And so there's always like these micro scenarios we can pull out. It's like, great, that just buys us two more weeks of runway. We've got another article that we can write, hopefully, if there's interesting stuff with the data. So I don't have a great answer for you, but hopefully
there will be plenty of questions that come from the audience.
Yeah.
Before we get into more specific questions, I want to address the theme for tonight, how leading go-to-market teams are winning together. And I think part of, or at least more recently, of leading teams is a lot of the other roles that are not necessarily selling. And I think Erin would have a lot of insight to that. So we'd love to understand how teams are winning nowadays, just broadly. Like what is the strategy that teams are taking? Because you've seen this both from in a company helping to develop these strategies to also being a consultant and helping to advise and see what many different companies are doing to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to your first question over how things are evolving. And when you look at the systems and how they've changed over the last few years, we started with CRM, and then marketing automation, and then sales engagement, now customer success. And they've all built up these tech stacks that they're all using, and they started to use them independently. And the way that it's changing now is how those all have to actually work together. So if sales and marketing start to actually look at their data and see, oh, this will tell us that this is a customer that we should go after. What does marketing do? What does sales do? How is that a collective effort? It's not that, oh, marketing delivered us a handful of leads. Oh, but we don't want those leads, we want different ones. I think it used to be a lot more throw it over the wall, and now it's more planning together, looking at the data, and then continuing to cycle through that and improve the process.
We'll get into more about that, because I think a lot of people are still not as familiar with RevOps terms and how all these other operational roles are assisting sales teams, CS teams, marketing teams, and more.
Is that all for me?
Cool. Let's jump into the details. Let's jump into the fun stuff. Ryan, I'm going to start with you first. On the same note, teams are no longer just SDRs, AE managers. There's a lot more complexity to it. There's a lot more involved in that process. So how have you been, since you've joined, the team has grown tremendously. How have you architected the team? What does the team look like now and what was it when you joined, and can you paint a picture for what it looks like now as well?
Yeah. It certainly changed over time. When I joined the company, the sales customer success team was sub 50 people. We're about 300 now.
Just sales and customer
Just
success.
sales and customer success. So it's scaled quite a bit. When we first started, it was your just traditional AE role, and I think we had a handful of SDRs and customer success managers. And as we've grown over time, the biggest thing that has been part of the growth strategy is a specialization. So at every level of your scale and your growth, there's opportunities to go deeper into a specific business function, and it's going to be different for every business. You have to take a look at the metrics and the data and figure out where is your opportunity. Where can you double down and grow faster? Or where do you have a challenge today where you're not addressing customers' needs fast enough? And so a couple highlights for you on places that we've invested now to get to that 300. The first one is in a dedicated sales team focused in on growth, and that's what Chris is working on now. But at Sprout, it seems obvious, but at the time it wasn't. We've got 22,000 customers. When I started, we were probably 15,000. We had our CSMs doing all of the sales activities for success, and it was a real conflict of interest for them in trying to drive adoption and best practices and really be the advocates for the customer, and then at the same time trying to grind them on a negotiation to add on a new product. And so what started as a pilot project with 3 people that were doing growth, we said, hey, you know what, we think that there's a vein to tap in here, there's a huge opportunity, it's a massive customer base, we're adding more products. How do we have more dedicated sales conversations with our customers? Started with 3 people, and we piloted that in 2017. And today that team's 50 people, and it's our most productive sales team we have in the organization. The second, just selling into our customer install base. And the second one I'll just quickly mention, I think it's really important for any company that's growing and scaling. And if I had to rewind and do this over again, I would have started there as onboarding. Product-led growth, it's very easy to get customers in. You get really excited when they're up and running and they're subscribing in 30, 35 days. We didn't invest enough in onboarding. We didn't invest at all in onboarding. We just assumed that the product was good enough that they would get up and running. But as you get more sophisticated and add more features to your platforms, often the value, the Easter eggs that exist, customers aren't finding. And so we realized that in the last year, we've launched an onboarding team, so dedicated specialists that are there to provide onboarding for all of our customers. And we've moved the net revenue retention for those customers almost 30% in the last year compared to the customers that we didn't onboard before. So point is, you got to look at the data and the metrics and figure out where the opportunities lie and then make decisions based on that.
When you started this pilot for the sales team that sells into the install base sooner, do you think there's a right time for when companies should look at that? Because you could probably specialize too soon, spreading yourself too thin.
I think the first thing you need to figure out is, do you have more to offer to a customer? And so that means, for us, 3 years ago, it was really just one platform, 4 flavors, and you were trying to upgrade people. And we really didn't have enough differentiation. So pricing and packaging was something we spent a lot of time on trying to figure out, did we have the right pay gates? Did we have the right value in each product? But then your add-on strategy, what additional products can you provide to customers where it makes sense to have a sales team? And so as we started to add things in 2017 and 2018, we realized that there was a lot of opportunity. We had a wide enough customer base that having dedicated sales focus would actually drive demand. And over time, as we've continued to add products and add customers, there's now a huge amount of opportunity. In fact, too much opportunity. Right now, our reps have probably 500 accounts that they're covering, which is just way too much. They wouldn't agree with me, but it's just way too much to cover.
What's the ideal amount? What's the ideal size based on your experience? Maybe subjective based on industry.
Yeah, it definitely depends on your sales cycle time, and your average contract value, and who you're selling to. For us in our business right now, I think you could give people 50 live customer accounts and they could make their number. I think focus really drives execution.
Do you guys always start with enterprise?
No, we didn't. We actually.
You go to your website,
yeah.
And obviously all the clients right now are on enterprise. So I want to understand when you went into enterprise and it was a conscious decision versus pulling you in.
Yeah, we actually started as an SMB company. So product-led growth, focusing in on the product. The product is our best salesperson. And that's how the company generated some initial scale. And from that, we started to complement it with sales effort. And so it grew from an SMB. But what started to happen, and this is really why I ended up at the company, we started to have mid-markets, enterprises, larger agencies showing up at our doorstep, signing up for trials, filling in demo request forms. And what we realized is that the approach that we were taking before, which was just product-led growth and very little sales effort, wasn't matching up to the way that those customers were buying. And so over time, we've moved up market. We still absolutely cover our SMB clients, but it's certainly been us building on top of it. And I think it's just much easier to go up market than it is to go down. So certainly SMB starting and then focused on moving the team up. But I would say that our sweet spot is still the mid-market.
One last question. This interrogation, we need to move on. But I love getting into the details. So when I was chatting with Chris not too long ago, I asked him, what's one of the most challenging parts of your job? Because initially he was in sales, joined Gong in a product marketing fashion, now he's back into sales. And one of the things he mentioned was just continuing to run the ship, but also needing to focus on hiring. Spending time in interviews, finding the right candidates, making sure that I'm allocating enough time to doing a job there, because if you're not bringing in great players, then it's going to cascade down. So does that ever stop for Chris? Chris wants to know, does it ever stop?
It hasn't for me. I mean, I think if you're in a company that's growing and scaling, even if you're not, it's a massive priority. The talent that we have has absolutely been the biggest factor in driving the growth and success of the company. And so I spend a lot of time doing it. I spend a lot of time networking. I spend a lot of time taking coffees and lunches. I actually spend a lot of time on LinkedIn Navigator just prospecting. And so I think that as leaders, it's a massive part of your job that you need to prioritize and spend time on, and it pays massive dividends when you get the right people in. The only other thing that I'll add, it's a core value for our company, but it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm part of a not-for-profit that's focused in on that in Chicago. But I spend a lot of my time actually prospecting for diverse candidates. And that's something that I've prioritized for my leadership team as well, so that we make sure that as we're bringing on talent, it's also talent that's representative of the type of company we want to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are pretty more focused on that. Let's jump into a topic that's near and dear to my heart, operations, specifically sales operations. I know, Ryan, when you started, you mentioned two of the first people that you hired were sales ops, so I'd love to get into that shortly. But first off, I want to take a step back and understand this new concept of RevOps, something that many people may not have heard of or have dabbled in, but don't have the full extent of what RevOps entails. So can you, Erin, give us just a breakdown in terms of how you define RevOps and what it means to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too picky about the words. Some people might call it growth ops or GTM ops or business ops. I think that in a lot of companies it operates very similarly. When you talk about all of the systems and data and process that sit behind marketing, sales, and customer success, it's the umbrella over all three of those.
Who does RevOps report into?
That depends at different companies. I don't know that there's an industry best practice definition, to be totally honest. I think that it's either CRO, if you have one, or if you have, VPs of sales and marketing, if you're at an earlier stage, it's usually like a head of finance or a COO or someone that gets them outside of just reporting to a sales leader so that they can be sort of an objective third party.
Do you guys have RevOps teams, or are you still split by function?
We have both sales ops and business ops, and I think they kind of co-attack the problems that RevOps solves for as a couple different functions there. And to your credit, they report to the CRO. Yeah.
I think I'm out of batteries.
That's the first.
Thank you.
Anyone got batteries? Anyone?
So I have a sales operations function that reports into me. We also have a marketing operations function that reports into our CMO. We're looking at it right now. I think that there's a lot of business value in having it all sit in one team and having one team that literally is looking at the same data and providing feedback and ideas for the rest of the organization. So it exists in two different places today. They're joined at the hip, but I absolutely see the value of it being one team.
Yeah, I mean, the evolution that I watched in going from being in sales and leading sales teams and then leading sales ops was very specific problems that we would uncover. For example, we saw that the head of sales and head of marketing had separately purchased the same type of software. And we were just doing things that were not aligned. Or, marketing was reporting on here's how much pipeline we generated, and sales was saying here's how much pipeline we generated, but together they didn't add up to the total company pipeline generation because they were overlapping and double reporting. And so having a single version of the truth, a single tech stack, having all of those things connected creates a lot of efficiency, not just in spend, but in the actual day-to-day process of each team.
How many small startups are going to go out of business when they realize they've sold to two separate teams and end up condensing their tech stack? I want to open up some questions to the audience. I'll take a couple questions really quickly. Nick's going to run around. First, let me gauge and see if there are any questions that anyone has. Normally we wait for them at the end, but just to interact and make sure that people can talk about some of the topics. Any questions? Anyone have any questions? Are people happy? Are people liking the content so far? Can we get a yeah? Woo! Okay. All right, let's move on. On the theme of RevOps, so what does that look like? What does that look like day to day at Lean Data specifically? What are you focused on? Who's on your team? Can you give us can you paint a picture for us?
Yeah, for us, we have someone who leads enablement, and then within the team, we have a head of marketing, sales, and customer success ops. So they each have a team that they focus on. They're just all together under the RevOps umbrella. So those are the main people. We're continuing to grow out each function. I think that that's a good place to start for the size that we are today. And then as we grow, we'll have somebody own the tech stack and data analysis and various functions within the team. From a day-to-day operations perspective, right now we're looking at 2020 planning. So we're looking at what did we do this year? What do we want to do next year? How do we connect from the top-down revenue to the amount of pipeline and opportunities, target accounts we need to go after, looking at all of those things and what's working and figuring out where we want to make changes.
Is there an optimal size for a team for you to want to bring in an operations person? Like, when do you know that you need to bring in a marketing ops person or sales ops or CS ops?
I think early on, a lot of functional leaders will sort of do those roles themselves. Like, your early head of marketing would run your marketing automation platform, and your early head of sales might outsource or have one person help with Salesforce. But I think once you get over 50 people, that's where you really need to have somebody who can connect the dots and make those things run more smoothly. And then when you start to get into over 100 and over 150 people, that's when you have a lot of chaos if you don't have a very organized process for all of those things.
Let's test that theory, Ryan. You were 50 people, at least on the sales and CS side, so even bigger than 50 people, when you joined and you hired the first two sales ops people. So there was no one in sales ops. So what was the team like when you joined? Or better yet, how big of a shit show was there when you joined? And what were the first, because you hired the sales ops people, so you clearly identified that there was a need there, and you hired two of them. So what was the thought behind that?
I'm back on here. I think we'll see what happens. So when I joined, 50 people, no sales enablement, no sales operations. So I think the team was doing a lot, but it was just a lot of brute force. The biggest gap for us is very little reporting, very little structure. You hire new people, there's no set processes, there's no 14 days of onboarding where everybody knows every hour of every day. And so that was the biggest opportunity for us. So I hired the director of sales operations as my first hire, and then the manager of sales enablement. And immediately we jumped into reporting. We were an inside sales shop, inbound marketing. People were getting 300 trials a month, and we had no reporting. And so everything was either written on a notepad or an Excel. And so we got in and built dashboards and reports and did daily reporting and redid the compensation plans and made sure that we had the right incentives and levers to get people excited and made sure that we were onboarding people in the right way and then providing that ongoing training. So yeah, I agree. At the 50 point, we were starting to break pretty badly. And what we immediately saw is that there was a ton of stuff that was getting dropped on the floor that we were able to pick up just by providing some structure and some training.
Or some people who haven't been touched in a certain amount of time and things like that. When did things start breaking? Because at every there's these inflection points that happen. And obviously you get too big for the processes that you've built.
I mean, kudos to Justin, our CEO. I think he had identified that we were not improving our conversion rate. So you've got those metrics that are your true north of what the company's doing, and our conversion rates, and we call it RPS, or revenue per subscriber, weren't really moving up as much as they were in the early days. And you started to get into this place where you're still a relatively small company, but the growth trajectory was starting to level off. And so in looking at those metrics and realizing that the top of the funnel, what was coming in from marketing, was still really healthy, but we weren't really getting better as a sales organization. And I think that he had seen some of those things and felt like we needed to put more structure in place to help the team execute.
Well, I would love to dig into some of those metrics. I think every team has their true north for metrics that they look at. So can you elaborate on some of the other metrics, and then I'd love to go down to the other speakers too.
I was just going to add a quick story. I think that in a lot of companies, the things that work when you're small enough to all sit in one room, they work great at that point. And then as you get bigger and you have people in various locations, you don't necessarily see when things get dropped on the floor because you're not asking the right questions. So having somebody who can actually dig into the data and figure out what you should be looking at is really helpful. One thing that we found out recently is that when someone uses our product and they go to a new company, they tend to buy us again. But we weren't tracking when they left their old company and going to a new company. So we had this huge opportunity to say, hey, congrats on the new job. Do you want to talk? And it ended up delivering like 50% of our new business revenue. It's like, we're missing this whole thing and we didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. That's one of the metrics that you track for, you look for, you identify, and it's always at the top of the dashboard. What else comes to mind?
So we've got two groups. I've got the sales group and the success group. On the sales side, it's definitely conversion rate. So we're looking at conversion from a trial and demo to a subscriber close rate. We're looking at the revenue per subscriber. So how much is each individual customer worth? And then we're looking at the number of subscribers. So those are some of the metrics. We've also introduced what we call a subscriber fit. So we take a bunch of historical data. We look at where the company came from, the employee count, if it was organic or paid advertising, the plan type that they picked. All of this data contributes to a sub-fit score. And so we're scoring the trials and the leads that are coming in to make sure that we're putting the hottest stuff in our sales team's hands and then tracking the metrics against that. So that's on the sales side. On the success side, we're essentially looking at the retention. So how many customers are we keeping versus contracting, and then the growth within those customers to get to a net revenue retention number.
Chris, differences, similar metrics?
Yeah, my organization sells to our customer base, so we look at net dollar retention as well. We also look at, even though we're selling to the customer base, like as a sales team, we look at logo churn as well. Because, well, there's a couple of reasons. The last thing we want our reps to be doing is going into our customer base and like scorching the earth and just like closing a bunch of big upsells at the expense of like pissing off a lot of other customers that end up churning. So we look at, even though we're a sales organization, not a success organization, we do look at logo churn really closely. I had another one, it just escaped me though. It'll probably come back to me, so.
Erin, anything you look at that's different? Because you're looking at it from a different lens.
I mean, on the new business side, very similar. We do score accounts and how good of a fit we believe this account is for using us. And then as people engage with our marketing campaigns and they're routed to that account and to the owner of that account, we'll assign different behavior and follow-ups based on how we've scored them and how we want to prioritize things. On the customer side, we do track usage, number of users. If they're not using the number of users that they purchase, then that's an opportunity to go in and help them. If they're using more users than they purchase, that's an opportunity to go in and grow them. Or if they have a huge number of employees and a small number of users, that's an opportunity to go into different sales teams and business units and just defining the behavior based on those categories.
Go ahead.
I just wanted. Yeah, we're gonna go back here. Thank you. I'd layer on one more thing there, because I think Erin's point around usage is huge, and we're guilty of this. I think many companies make this mistake that they don't get a good grasp on their product usage early enough. It's one thing to surface it. It's really important that you start to build in some workflow, some automation for your team, so you have a really good understanding of what a healthy customer looks like, where there's opportunity to grow up, but conversely, where you have retention risk. And so that's one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on over the last little while, is building health scores and making sure that not just our customer success managers are leveraging it, but the product team is using it and the customer marketing team is using it, so that we truly have a concerted effort across the entire company to make sure that we're driving success for our customers.
In preparation for this, I obviously stalked all of you, and I watched one of your videos, Chris, at Sales.
I'm sorry.
I know. No, it was a great video, and you spoke about something that I think resonates with a lot of people, and with some of the themes you spoke about today. But you said something along the lines of, nowadays it's not what you sell, but how you sell. And you probably see this a ton at Gong. How you sell is more important now than what you're selling. So can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Pretty straightforward, but I'm sure you've got a good reason behind it. And then what you're doing at Gong, what's different, what's working?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say how you sell is more important than what you sell. I would say, like, in today's environment, it's probably equal as far as how it influences buying decisions. And I think the reason for that is the explosion in competition in pretty much every B2B category that's out there. So, like, my favorite illustration of that is MarTech, like marketing technology. Back in 2011, there were 150 total vendors in the marketing technology world. Does anybody know what that number is today?
6,000.
Somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000.
Maybe 9,000 now.
And so the point there is, it's pretty rare for like a unique snowflake of a product to cut through that noise. It could be a really unique product, but because there's just so much choice out there, the differences tend to blur up in buyers' minds. And so you get these situations where, you know, your buyer looks at a dazzling product demo from you, and they look at a dazzling product demo from your competitor, and they start to like feel the desire to start telling the difference between these two products. And so one of the buyers has like this bright idea of creating that like spreadsheet feature comparison thing of death. So anybody been there before? Yeah, competitive deal. Anybody know somebody who's been there maybe, like personally? And so what you get in situations like that, it's like the twin effect. Like if you walk down the street and you see parents with twins, you can't tell the difference between the twins because you're not exposed to those kids like night and day like the parents are. But the parents can tell the difference between those kids very easily because they're with them all the time. They can see that like one of the twins' ear is shaped slightly different than the other or something like that. And so buyers feel the same way about your product versus your competitor's product. You know the differences like the back of your hand. You eat, sleep, and drink your product. And your competitor knows the same thing. But again, like your buyer probably saw a product demo or two from each of you, and they're expected to be able to like immediately tell twins apart. And so that's why we make this assertion, and this is not like, this is a belief we have at Gong. This is not like how we market ourselves, that how you sell has become more important or as important as what you sell. It's not that what you sell is not important. It's that for competitive advantage, it's a ticket to play the game rather than the decider.
Thank you. I don't know why I keep trying this thing. I definitely agree with that. I mean, for us, in looking at our own metrics and data, that story stands out in that I'm really proud of our sales team's execution. If we get a customer to a discovery call, they're engaged, we close 50% of those deals. But we only get 16% of those to that stage. And that is the opportunity for us as an organization, is how do we differentiate in the sea of sameness at the stage where customers are doing the evaluation so that we don't all look like the twins, right? That we differentiate ourselves.
I think this goes back to enablement like you were talking about. So I'm really proud of our enablement team, and the team is doing an awesome job. But funny story from before is that we kept hearing reps on calls would ask questions and uncover a pain and then go, awesome, here's what we do, and jump right into the product. And it was just right into the features, right into the details, and they didn't like one, empathized with the customer's problem and pain, and two, didn't go through the process of understanding, like, why does that matter, what is the impact, and all of the things that you want them to do. So it was an issue of process and how they sell, and so we've addressed that. It was a big deal.
Great. So, I'm kidding. Active listening, right? Analyzing the calls. Like, this is a perfect group to talk about exactly that. In talking about differentiation, or at least how you differentiate yourself, Ryan, I want you to share the story about the graveyard pitch and how that came about, because I spent a day at Salesforce a couple weeks ago, and I was telling the person that I'm Ryan on the panel, I was like, oh, Ryan, I think Ryan came up with this graveyard pitch for Pardot. Apparently every Pardot rep at Salesforce, for good or for better or for worse, is using this pitch. So we'd love to hear a bit about it and how they're differentiating themselves.
Yeah, this the Pardot pitch for us. So I was at Salesforce. Pardot was an acquired company, and I joined that team to lead global sales. And one of the things that happened after my first quarter there is I feel like we got punched in the face. Like the growth was nowhere near what Salesforce expected from that business unit. And what we realized as we dug in a little deeper is that we were in this sea of sameness. We sound the exact same as every other marketing automation company. And we didn't have the brand of a HubSpot or a Barretto or an Eloqua. And so the light bulb just went off that we really needed to differentiate the story that we were telling and get away from the product and actually get into the mindset of the marketer and make sure that we were digging into the real opportunity with marketing automation. And for us, was this idea of, we called it the lead cemetery, this idea that the majority of your leads, is almost 80% plus of your leads, ultimately go into this lead cemetery where they don't convert. And most companies ignore it. And marketing automation, at its purest, can actually do a great job nurturing that in the background while your team is focused in on other leads and warming it back up to the top of the funnel. And so part of the story was honestly just putting a marketing hat on and going across the entire organization and trying to certify everybody on this pitch, which we made a whiteboard pitch. We actually made every employee also videotape themselves on their phone and actually have their manager certify them for it. But I think the part that you're laughing about is the light bulb moment unfortunately went off for me just after my wife delivered. And so we ended up doing the first Pardot pitch after our daughter Isla came out, and we were hanging out for many, many hours just sitting there. And fortunately, my wife is really into cloud stuff, so that was kind of the backstory behind that.
Moral of the story, there's two places to get inspiration. A walk in the woods, where they have
with wine,
or after the birth of your first child?
That was
Second child, there you go. If you're taking anything away. Perfect. I want to ask a couple rapid fire questions just before we move to the audience. Specifically around what you think your company is world class at. What you guys think you're doing today that people here can walk away and say, there's something that we need to invest in, or we need to focus on, or we need to emphasize this quarter, next year. I want to take a look at this. Chris, let's start with you.
So are you asking what are we really good at internally, as a core competency?
I think so.
Okay, I would say sales execution, and it's because we have to be. Does anybody in here sell to sales leaders, VPs of sales? They're really hard to sell to, unless you're extremely good at selling. Then they become putty in your hands because they love it. They have so much respect for all the technique, and that's who we sell to. We sell to VPs of sales. And because we sell to them and our value prop is more or less making their salespeople more effective, we have to be really good at that. So sales execution is where my head goes.
I mean, the thing that jumped out in my mind first is more on our implementation side. We're pretty technical as a company. We like to jump into the problem, work with our customer, and actually get them up and using our product and getting really hands-on with operations. So that's where we've seen really happy customers. And as we continue to grow up in marketing and sales and the company grows, hopefully I'll say they're all world-class, but that's where we're doing really well.
Your Lead is a bit different in that you don't have this PQL model. People aren't necessarily signing up for a free trial because of the complexity. So how is your sales process a bit different than Gong and Sprout, because you don't have the luxury of people signing up 300 signups a month?
For us, there's a lot of conversations early on and a lot of education, like what are you doing? How does your sales process work? What is from marketing to sales to customer success? What happens? What's manual? Where are the gaps? And then helping them to figure out what the solutions are. A lot of times we work with consultants. A lot of times we work with other vendors. We have, various integrations. So there's just a lot of education through that process.
I have a quick thing to add. So we actually don't have a PQL model. Like we have a lot of inbound leads, but they're more like content leads rather than like people signing up for trials. We only give trials like in a qualified sales process. And just one of the things I've noticed about sales models that rely heavily on like trials versus those that don't is in the ones that don't, it kind of creates a void. And that void is usually filled by word of mouth. Like if you can't try out the software, then word of mouth as a dynamic in your market skyrockets in terms of importance. That's not to say word of mouth doesn't happen in PQL model sales motions, but it almost has to happen in sales cycles where you don't try out the product before like engaging in a formal sales process with a salesperson.
So you find oftentimes people when they're coming inbound, if they're not directly from content, they're saying, I heard about your product from X customer or X person.
Yep.
Interesting.
I think for Sprout, it would be customer success and support. And so we provide support, customer success managers for companies of all shapes and sizes. It doesn't matter what your spend is, what your contract length is, what plan you picked. If you want to talk to someone at Sprout, you can. And that's not just through chat or email. You can actually talk to someone live. And most people would argue that you can't scale that model, but we do it with 25 people across 22,000 customers. Now the secret there is having an awesome product, right? So that's a big part of it, is that product-led growth. You have to have a great product that's going to enable your success and support people to deliver on that, but then also just prioritizing it. And it sounds like table stakes, but when you look in the marketplace and you look at all these different products and verticals, it's surprising how many people are falling down on delivering that world-class customer success and support.
Any companies today that you think do deliver that, besides the ones up on the panel? Because you buy tools, you see a lot of tools.
Mm-hmm. I think HubSpot's done a good job there. I read a lot on G2 Crowd and check out how companies are doing. You can see a lot there. Seems like Drift's done a really nice job with that. Zoom would be the other one that's been really great for us.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. A round of applause for me. I have a tendency to go way over my time, and often results in everyone running to the washroom, so try to end it in a reasonable time today. Want to open up the floor for questions. We've got Nick here with the runners, so we have a bit more time, so we have room for one more question.
Hi, I'm Bruce Hartman. Question for Ryan, actually. You mentioned one of your leadership practices was to continuously recruit, do coffees, do lunches, etc. I'm curious, do you model or track that for your own staff to say, don't sit behind email all day, carve out some time? How do you encourage or model that behavior? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We do. We talk a lot about it in our sales leadership meetings, especially as we're looking through the hires that we need to make across our team. I've also just made a point of making sure that when my leaders are hiring our roles, especially sales leadership roles, that I'm also helping them source candidates for those roles. So our latest example, we just hired a new manager for our BDR team, and that came from some of my sourcing from LinkedIn. So I found 8 candidates and sent notes out to some of these people to try and generate the conversation. So I definitely think that it starts with modeling the way. It's hard to just tell people to do it and expect them to do it without showing that you're willing to do the same work.
Just to build on that question, just curious, I know you're investing a lot of time, all of you, in the onboarding process. Have you given any thought, or do you do anything in terms of bringing your team into your target or your prospects to really understand their day-to-day and their challenges, just to break apart that sea of sameness, they really understand what they're facing every day, they can kind of sell the why versus the what. Do you do anything like that?
I mean, one of the things that we've started to do is to bring a customer into each of our monthly company meetings to tell the story of what they were facing, why they're working with us, what results they've actually seen, and get those personal stories. We've seen a huge result from that.
One of the things we do, like most product marketing or product management teams do like what are called buyer persona interviews. And so we have the majority of those recorded and like accessible to everybody in the company, and they're usually integrated into the onboarding process as like part of their learning objectives. Yeah.
So similar for us, there's a few things that we think about. One, our marketing team's been awesome in providing enablement. So we're selling to a lot of marketers, so that they, on a monthly basis, will do education for us on what marketers are thinking about and the way that they want to be engaged with and what's top of mind for them. We use Gong, so call recording software is another one. So we have folders of calls that we want people to onboard with and to listen to. And then we get people in the product. So we want them to start attaching their own personal profiles and publishing through our platform and getting a sense for what our end users are doing so that they create some empathy as they go.
My question is for Ryan, and it ties back to your Salesforce/Orlov experience. How do you maintain the customer satisfaction level when a lot of the implementation is actually done through channel partners? Because in the past 6 or 7 months, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of Salesforce partners, and they have all sorts of customers. Some customers complain about Salesforce not listening to them. All Salesforce cares about is selling licenses. And there are also customers that say Salesforce as a product is great, but the partner they were working with was a complete pain. So, like, how do you manage? How do you maintain the balance between both?
I think it's been one of the reasons that I think Salesforce has grown so well over the years. I joined in 2006. At that time, there was a decent-sized professional services organization, and shortly after that time, they really started to invest in the partner ecosystem, and it sounds like there's a lot of partners that are here in this audience. For us at Pardot, we had very specific Pardot partners that we worked with. We tried to do our best to bring them in and trying to share with them a lot of our product roadmap and things that we were focusing in on. And then we really encouraged the sales organization to develop deep relationships with the partners that were in their geography so that they really became an extension of that sales force. And that close proximity and that ongoing relationship over time ensured that there was mutual accountability when we were working with a customer. There's always going to be examples of a bad rep or a partner that had an implementation that didn't go well, but I think it's really driven by creating deep relationships at the partner and the Salesforce level where you know that you're going to be continuing to work together time and time again, and those deep relationships usually pay off in the long run for the customer.
Hi, I have got 2 questions to all 3 of you. The first one is, can you name the top 3 industry peers in your space? And also the second part is, how would you compare your conversion ratio compared to your peers?
Just going to interject quickly. In the interest of time, I want to make sure we get a couple more questions there. I'm going to say let's answer the second question. It's what I'm personally more interested in. So I'll pass it off to you guys. Specifically conversion rates relative to maybe what you've seen at other companies or other experiences, and what you consider conversion rates and how you think of that.
Do you mean other peer companies, like competitors, or do you mean peers in similar roles?
Peers in your industry.
Okay. So I mean, one of the things that we do is we look a lot at industry standards with companies like Topo, things that they've benchmarked through research and looked at what best practices are, and that's really what we compare our conversion rates and things against. One of the things that we've been dealing with recently is how do we continue to level up our account development team? You can look at quality and quantity, and they sort of balance out, where if you ratchet up quality, you'll get fewer. So following industry best practices from people who've done research like Topo.
This might be a non-answer, but we don't, well, one, everybody in our space is private, so I have no idea what they're doing. But two, even if we had that data, we're focused on ourselves. And so we look at our metrics a lot. We scrutinize them every month. We have something called, we call it the Sales BOD, Sales Board of Directors. I have that Thursday when I get back home. And we have every single business unit come through and present for an hour on their business to the CEO. And so for us, we're just looking at our numbers and we're trying to beat them every single month. So we look at those true north metrics that we talked about before and figure out what we should be doing and how we should execute against them and what's broken in our process today that can get better. I think it's just too hard to try and figure out what the rest of the competition is doing, especially because even within your industry, your products, your go-to-market strategy, your ideal customer profile is so different.
Yeah, I would say if anybody does know my competitors' conversion rates, let's have a conversation after this. I'm curious what they are as well. I don't know what they are. But I would echo what Ryan just said. We're focused on improving ourselves as well. We don't really, I mean, we look at the benchmarks, we look at Topo, we look at, Bridge Group and all that kind of stuff. That's probably where you can find the best sources of information. We don't obsess about it, though. We obsess about moving the needle on our previous selves.
We have one more question.
So at Nudge, we also sell to sales leaders. So Chris, your story definitely resonates. It's kind of a two-pronged question because we don't seem to get as much interest as we thought we would with revenue operations. So Erin, what do you kind of look for something you think, hey, this is really great, I'm going to take this to the rest of the organization? And then Chris, as someone that sells to sales leadership, how's your approach differ when you're talking to revenue ops or sales ops?
How do they sell to you?
First answer is we're terrible to sell to. The thing for me personally, and I've been in sales, I know all the sales tactics, and I find them really frustrating. So I think it's just to teach me something. I can't know all of the different technologies out there. It's impossible. There are too many. So if you're teaching me something, providing value, then that is absolutely worth a conversation.
Remind me your question.
How do you guys approach selling to sales or revenue ops as opposed to going right to like the VP of sales or?
So to Erin's credit, we avoid selling to revenue ops like the plague. Nothing against them, it's just not our buyer. When I found that the secret, I think so when it comes to selling to sales leaders, and not just sales leaders, but like not just the SVP of sales and CRO, but the frontline manager, director of sales, you have to tie value to each of those buyer personas along a spectrum from tactical to strategic. And so when we're selling Gong to like a director of sales or maybe like a frontline sales manager, we're going to talk about coaching a lot because that's how they spend their day. We're going to talk about deal management and like immediate, like understanding your business and what's going on. If we take that same value prop and we relay that to like an SVP of sales, it might resonate, but they're less interested in like the day-to-day, and we're more so talking about like what I would call visionary pain instead of operational pain. And so like with an SVP of sales, we're asking them, what are like your do or die go-to-market initiatives for 2020 that you have to see executed on the front lines? And now we're selling to that type of pain. So it's like visionary pain at the executive level, operational pain at the director and below level.
Can I just add one more thing there? And I think this all ties to product-led growth. Don't underestimate the power of the end user. And OpenView just wrote an amazing article on product-led growth. You're shaking your head, you've read it. I mean, to me, for those that haven't read it, they talked about this evolution that's happened in technology that's gone from the early days of needing to sell to the CIO to get technology in an organization to evolving to, okay, it's the CIO doesn't have all that power now. It's actually being pushed down to the department leaders and the CMOs and the other C-levels to where we are today, which is the end users actually have a ton of power in this decision-making process. And so we are spending a lot of time thinking about that end user, because for us, the social media manager is actually the person who makes the biggest difference. And we can reach out to the CMO all day long, but we're gonna have very, very low hit rates. But if we get to that social media manager and we create some groundswell and we get them in the product, they're gonna put that project on the CMO's desk, and that CMO is gonna lean into what their team's telling them to do. So I think Chris is right in that you've gotta have different plays for different groups, but don't forget about the end user.
A lot of my lessons were don't sell as low as you can, and then often tend to be more effective. This is the okay. Cool. Thank you for the questions. Amazing. Now, quickly, just round of applause for amazing panelists tonight. You're very easy to work with and open to coming to Toronto, which is fantastic. Not many people are, so it was wonderful having you guys here. The show's not done. We still have time left. You can ask all your questions to the panelists. They'll stay here. But there will be another SalesTO. The show does go on. November 13th, you can find us here again. Not here exactly, but in the city. We'll be having another amazing event. So thanks for everyone coming out tonight, and appreciate your support.